Hi, I'm Bajer.
Hi, I'm Shani Person.
Welcome to The Deep Dive, a monthly CultureLab podcast where we dive headfirst into a topic that is crucial for building thriving cultures at scale. Join us as we geek out and explore the intricacies of culture, discussing everything from the latest trends to timeless philosophies.
With each episode, we take a deep dive into a specific area, offering unique perspectives and insights on how to create and sustain a culture that fosters growth, innovation, and success.
Whether you are a business leader, HR professional, or just someone interested in understanding how cultures work, the CultureLab's Deep Dive is the show for you.
So sit back, relax, and get ready to take the plunge into the fascinating world of culture with us.
And today, we're going to talk about conversations that matter and how they shape your company culture. I will shortly share the conversation that we had with Shani, but first, let me tell you about the CultureBrained community. CultureBrained is a place where culture leaders connect with exceptional peers and where they learn from world-class experts. Some of them, by the way, the guests on this show. It's also where people get all the support they need to cultivate a culture where their employees can do their best work. We have a private member platform, toolkits, resources, and an amazing video library. And we make constant additions and improvements based on the question that is at the center of our work. How can we best support the people who work on company culture? If you are curious to learn more, go to tinyurl.com/CultureBrained, and you'll find a link in the show notes. And now, with no further ado, here is Shani and I riffing on conversations that can change the way we work and what our culture becomes. Hey, Shani.
Hey, Aga.
Welcome to the CultureLab.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here as always.
Same here, Shani. And especially about the topic that we have to unpack today, because it's a big one. It's an important one. And ironically, we don't talk often enough about it. And I say ironically because the topic of our conversation today is conversations that matter. And one of the reasons that we wanted to do a deep dive on this one is that we spend so much time at work. I think someone calculated 90,000 hours. And obviously, throughout our careers, in those 90,000 hours, we build and create hundreds, if not thousands, of relationships with others. And these relationships are incredibly important for our careers, our mental and sometimes even physical well-being. And they are important for the company culture as well, obviously, because patterns of interacting are culture, really. And one of the things that we've realized is that a really important thing to build good relationships, healthy working relationships, is through conversations. And so that's the topic that I want us to do a deep dive on today.
Amazing. I'm really excited about that.
Same here. Such an important topic. And I think that to build the context a little bit, maybe it would be useful for us to talk about how we define a healthy working relationship in the first place, because I think it's important to kind of wrap our minds around, what's the why behind it, right? What are we trying to build here? What is your take on that? What is a healthy working relationship for you, Shani?
My first thought as you put this question out is it's a relationship that allows for authenticity and allows for trust and creates context for people to achieve what they need to achieve together. Because I do think that one of the first things that popped up for me is that it doesn't have to be a friendship per se. It can be, and it can be beautiful to have friends at work, and that can also be really useful. But a working relationship is one where you can actually do and create things together, and then where you have the ability to be honest with one another, both in terms of, I think, what you can do or what you desire to do and your expectations, and also in terms of who you are and to the extent you're comfortable, what's going on with you and for you, without it being private, but still there being an ability and a space to be a little bit personal as well, so that we don't forget about bringing our humanness into the space of that relationship. I would love to get your flavor on this too, Aga. What do you think is a healthy working relationship?
Yeah, I think a lot of the things that you have shared resonate with me as well. The core of a healthy working relationship is that we have the collaboration and the environment where we can elevate each other and help each other accomplish things that are important for us. So for me, it's almost like a partnership. Ideally, a healthy relationship is a partnership where we are concerned and supportive of each other's aspirations, goals, and, what we're trying to do, and where we co-create. And of course, all of that needs to be underpinned, I think, by certain mindsets and approaches, like obviously respect for each other and trust that you've mentioned, curiosity about the other person, both in terms of, professional aspirations, again, and stuff that people want to achieve and their objectives, but also curiosity about the person. And I agree with you that a great, healthy working relationship, it certainly doesn't need to be a friendship. But I think what's really important is that we do see the person behind the title and that we see the human being that is in front of us. Because sticking just to the professional, the persona, I don't think it cuts it really. For me, it's not a healthy working relationship when you pretend that when you dehumanize the other person. That would be my take on it.
I love that. And also, I think one observation that I've made in this past half year, I think, is that it's not only about that we dehumanize the other person, it's actually that we dehumanize ourselves in the relationship. And when we go to work, is that we kind of put this suit or this armor on and we have a different set of expectations on ourselves to be less of whatever we are.
So true.
You definitely agree that it is about being able to express our humanness and with a choice of how private versus personal that actually becomes for us.
I love that. And thank you for bringing it up. It's actually something that has come up in one of the conversations that we had with a company that we're supporting in codifying their culture. It was a virtual call. And someone said, one of the things I would like us to role model for others is this ability to show up authentically at work. He spoke about his personal experience with that. And he said, the moment I started doing it myself, it was so liberating, first of all, for me. And I really was able to reach a part of myself that I never utilized because, certain parts of me, like the gamer, for example, he said, were not part of the conversation, but actually these parts were super useful, not just in building relationships at work, but also solving problems at work. So I think your point about not dehumanizing ourselves is so incredibly important, because the first relationship probably that we need to get right at work is the relationship with ourselves, right?
Yeah, 100%. It's really interesting. I think that's really been a thing that I've been paying attention to, how much, and even me, who I'm really dedicated to this question, what does more human look like in the workplace? I still find myself having expectations on myself or holding back on certain things because of the context of work. And I always try to challenge it, of course, but it is not entirely evident for whoever tries to do it, for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of social conditioning, I think, for decades. And even this word, and I hate it. I hate it when people talk about being professional.
Yeah.
Because there's so much baggage, right? And so many, I think it's such a terrible thing to keep in mind. How are we professional and what do we need to do? Because there are so many beliefs that people carry from their careers about what professional looks and feels like. But it often stands in the way of showing up authentically and really, really tapping into our full potential.
I actually had an experience with that thing in particular. About a year back, I was giving a class to quite young people, some of whom have never kind of been in a work setting. And they were asking me questions and they said, well, I can ask you this, but I wouldn't ask this to a client. And I said, why not? But it's not professional. And I thought, well, this is all I do in my work. I ask these questions. That is professional. It's not having all the answers. It is daring to go into a context with your curiosity, as we were saying in the beginning, and with your questions and even with your doubts, and using it in a way that can be beneficial to everyone. But it was really interesting because they were already like putting on the suits of, I wouldn't ask this of some. Why not? Why not ask somebody this? Why not challenge them?
Yeah. And I want to double click on what you have just mentioned, which is daring to have these conversations, right? Because there's a point that we discussed a lot in the CultureBrained community, and even before we start recording, right? Where we basically know that relationships affect us, but rarely are we really intentional about making them better. And, making a really bad relationship a little less bad, or making a good one great, and so on and so forth. And I think courage and, being bold in that choice. Do you know what? I'm actually going to talk about this to this person is incredibly important, because it's not easy usually. Exactly, because we have these assumptions like, I don't even know if it's okay to ask this question in the context of work, right?
Yeah. I would love to double click on that a little, because I know you have a lot of conversations and you do a lot of research in terms of, while of course we can talk conceptually about what does it look like in the hard conversations, what are some of the conversations that you found to matter in the context of work?
You know that I love learning from others and then kind of consolidate that. There are a couple of people that I've learned a lot about. One of the most important conversations that needs to happen at work. One of them is Caitlin Walker, a past guest on the CultureLab podcast. And the second person is Michael Bangistania, whom I interviewed already twice on the show. And they both talk in quite different ways, actually, about the working relationship conversation. So the first conversation that I believe needs to happen, and I learned a lot about it from them, is that one. And what I mean by that is the working relationship conversation is the conversation where you sit down with someone who's really important for you at work, and you talk about what would be the best way to collaborate and what you need to know about me to work well with me, and vice versa. Caitlin Walker, for example, suggests that we ask a few questions during this conversation, and so does Michael. So basically, it's a questions-based conversation. She talks about, and Michael as well, actually, a version of a question: who are you at your best? Talk to me about, what conditions do you need to have in place to really be at your best? And some people will say, I'm at my best when I sit down with my notepad and sketch something. So I'm not in front of a screen. I'm alone, actually, and I have some time for creative work and there are no disruptions. And it's a long stretch of time. This is where I'm at my best. And someone else will say, I'm at my best when I'm in conversation with someone and we are brainstorming and kind of, building on each other's ideas and stuff like that. And what it does is it builds that bridge, because when you share this information, you suddenly realize, oh, okay, so actually we need different things to be at our best. And then the next question is, so what can I do to help you be at your best? And it's incredible, when you clarify that suddenly, and now right? You know how you can help your colleague to be at their best. And they also know how they can help you be at your best. And then the second question in this working conversation is, and who are you at your worst? What's happening when you're at your worst? And again, knowing what derails people at work, what they find incredibly difficult to handle. It's such an important piece of information to have, right? Because again, you can avoid creating situations that will push them into being at their worst. This is the working relationship conversation. I think that, when you have a new colleague or a new collaborator, it's a must. And ideally, of course, you will have that conversation at the beginning of the relationship. And I also think that we need to refresh and maybe have this conversation maybe in a shorter form every 6 months or every year, because you know what? People change and they evolve. And maybe what I needed to be at my best 12 months ago, it has changed now. And so I need to update myself first and maybe sit down. And we talked about the relationship we have with ourselves. So I think the first step when we talk about working relationships is also asking myself, what do I need to be at my best now? Because my life situation has changed. I need different things today than the things that I needed a year ago. And so first talking to ourselves and then sharing it with the important people in our work life. So that for me is a really important conversation to have. How about you? What are other conversations that you see, or maybe you want to comment, Shani, first on what I've shared about the working relationship conversation?
I love so much about what you're bringing up here. And it also makes me think, just to bring it back to a word that you used describing this, which is partnership, and there being a mutuality to things. One thing in particular that I sometimes see make this a little bit of a struggle is the leader or manager employee relationship, which we sometimes treat much more as a one way. And I tend to hear people go, I need to tell my manager what I need. Yeah, of course you do. But do you know what your manager needs to be a good manager? Because I've spent a lot of years in corporate HR functions, and every time there's a problem and every time there's a new tool and every time there's a new process, everyone goes, oh, the manager can do that.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking every time, who is this person? Are they Superman? What kind of supplements are they taking to manage all of these things? One thing I want to pull out from what you're saying is it's mutual.
Yes.
Even if it's your manager, it is mutual.
Yes.
Relationships go two ways. And I love what you're saying around just the self-reflection. We also are bad at updating our self-image sometimes.
100%. Yeah. And you know, the thing about the working relationship conversation is that it's beautifully equalizing. And I love this point about the fact that we should be asking our managers and our leaders what they need from us to be at their best. Because first of all, it's in our personal interest for our managers to be at their best, right?
Yes.
we want to have a good manager. So why don't we help them to be at their best? 100%. But I also think it's wonderfully equalizing because you come together as two people who try to learn something. And so that relationship of maybe formal power kind of dissolves when you have a true connection in the working relationship conversation. And I think that makes it incredibly powerful as well, because it's not just about them helping you, as you say. It's about how you can help them too.
Or how the relationship can serve you both. And in a way, when you center the relationship and you don't center an individual per se, then you need to both chip in and you need to listen both ways. And for that to serve you, it can be a very different thing. Yeah.
Totally. So I think this is something that we should have with all the important people in our work lives, the working relationship conversation. But let's assume that we've had it and that's done. And we have the important information that we need. What other conversations do you see that really need to be happening frequently in order for us to nurture healthy relationships at work?
I am a big proponent of checking in with people, especially in a space of relationships where when you don't know everything about people, when you don't know what's going on in their life, or it can be that you come into situations where you take things personally that aren't personal, and that there is conflict created simply out of not knowing. And so I think for that humanness to be in that space, there is a lot to be said of just like, hey, how are you? How's your weekend? What's going on in your life? What do you need to unload or unburden to like come into this day with more energy? And I'm not saying this should be a lengthy process at all. I think it's more about just creating that space for the rest of life to fit into this kind of weave of things that we try to manage around work. I'm definitely a lot for having space for us to bring other parts, as you were saying, like whatever other roles and whatever other things we are doing in our life, make a little space for that. Those things can be really simple and straightforward. It's sometimes just while you're having your morning coffee, hey, what's going on for you? How's your morning? And sometimes somebody had a shitty commute and they really need to tell you the story about it. Or somebody had a really bad drop off with the kids. I know that's happened to me when I'm thinking, wow, I don't know how I'm even getting through the day. But just the fact that I get to say it out loud and somebody's listening on the other side, that really helps me just switch into our common work and common purpose. So yeah, I think for me, that is one of the most underestimated conversations, actually.
I agree with you so much, Shani. I think there's plenty of evidence as well. Like there's research that supports that. It's really priming us to do great work because when you are going through something like that bad commute or whatever, it really triggers the stress response and you cannot use your neocortex at work. So unless you vent and share it with someone, you will not be able to perform as well as you want. Then there's also this whole piece around building the relationship and the sense of belonging, right? Because when people are really interested about us as human beings, when we feel seen, when we feel heard, when we feel understood, this is when we feel like we belong. And actually recently heard, and I love it, and I'm sharing it with everyone, understanding is just a different word for love. And I think those check-ins that you talk about really contribute to our ability to understand the people that we work with. And I know that it's a dirty word at work to use, love, but I genuinely deeply believe that unless we can have and experience love for our work and for our colleagues, we will never have the experience and the results that we want to see at work.
Yeah, it's funny as you say, why is it a dirty word? It's really strange. Just, love and play and the things that fill us with joy and fill us with positive energy. Those are not words that we associate with work. It's really
not professional, Shani.
No, it's not professional. Right? You can't have that. But, I also have found that sometimes also, when you do share those things that are personal or hard or funny or weird, when you become a human in somebody else's eyes, that also helps create that desire to do for and with each other a little bit more.
And gives permission as well. When someone shares something personal with me, and I think it works very similarly for most people, it gives us that permission slip to do the same when we need to. And that's so incredibly important for me as well. Again, to humanize the workplace, and enable people to bring their whole selves. Someone needs to go first. That's super powerful. I love the check-ins. So that's our second conversation. If we were to create a list of 3 most important conversations in the workplace, I'm cutting down from our original plan of 5.
Go for it.
Let's try to have a consensus about what would be the third one. So like we have the working relationship conversation. We have these casual check-ins that are very frequent and incredibly important. Now, if we had to choose to master a third conversation, what would we choose? What conversations do you have in mind and which ones do you think are most important?
I think that there is something to be said, and I reluctantly use the word feedback because I struggle with that word a little.
Tell me why you struggle with it first.
I've spoken a lot to and learned a lot from a woman called Eva Hammonds, and she has created a model around how we have meaningful conversations that are not threatening to our brains. And it might be that we put different things into feedback, but in a lot of organizations and in a lot of structure, feedback is kind of serving of a judgment. And it sends us into a state of fight or flight,
totally,
of defensiveness. Yeah, it actually kind of removes that mutuality in the relationship.
Mm-hmm. It's a tool of control, exactly. I think that's the reason why it removes that sense of mutuality, because it is being used very often as a tool of control. And one of my people that I learned a lot again about feedback from is Caitlin Walker again. And we recently had her in the CultureBrained community. And she talked about, why we have these bad associations with feedback. And one of the reasons she mentioned is just like, even imagine the experiences that people have in their childhood with feedback, right? Where you get scolded, or it's certainly a tool of control very often in our childhood, especially to children. I think it can cause such a strong reaction of being rejected or not approved of, and so on and so forth. So we carry that baggage into our workplace, even if feedback is not being used as a tool of control. But as you say, very often it is a means of conveying judgment and trying to control others. So yeah, I totally get that, why you don't like the word and why you have bad associations with it.
Yeah, and I think, of course, there are people who do it in a very different way, and it might not mean that, but there are also a lot of context where it does, and where it's about a leader having an opinion about somebody or something that they do. Yeah, I think in many structures it can be really infantilizing. But that said, I do believe that it's necessary to be able to have conversations around how we experience things that somebody else does or says, or things that happen around us, and to be able to, in different ways, respond to each other and convey to each other if this didn't work out for me, or this felt this way for me when you did that, and vice versa, of course. So there has to be
that's an important one.
An ability for us to share those things. For me, when you center making it meaningful, you also share something, but you are also able to take ownership in that yourself. So
100%.
This was hard for me, and I see this is something that I can do, but this is something I would like from our relationship in a different way, or for us to be able to achieve what it is. Going back to that working relationship discussion is, how do we work? Yeah, I think you can't get away from that because we're human and because we're different.
Entirely. It's a tough one to come up with only 3 conversations, because I'm also thinking, I'm definitely with you on the feedback conversation. The word is not great, but thanks for unpacking what we mean by that. And it's super important at work. Right. People avoid it, but it's super important. The second one that we also love to avoid and hide from, which I think is important and a contender for number 3, is the constructive conflict conversation. Like, you disagree with someone, or there's something that you see differently. It needs to be discussed, because otherwise it's just going to fester and escalate and get worse with time. And so how do you have these conversations? I think these conversations are important as well. So if you were to choose between feedback conversation and constructive conflict conversation, which is our number 3, oh my gosh, hard to decide.
I want to say they're the same, and then we can squeeze them all into another headline. And I think, again, there's something about overall dealing with disagreement, dealing with friction, or
varying perspectives.
Or lack of flow. And sometimes it's about, what we think about what we're doing and how we should be approaching it. And sometimes it's personal, but I think, this is how my brain works. I'm like, but they were kind of the same family of things.
Yeah.
It's kind of handling friction in a constructive way.
Yeah.
Whether it's on a personal level or work related.
We have a word, Shani. The friction conversation.
The friction conversation. Yeah, I can roll with that.
Okay, cool. I'm happy with that as well. If we go with the friction conversation, it also takes away so much fear from, the other words like conflict and feedback. So I'm cool with that. So listen, to have these conversations well, I know because, I've been around for more than 50 years now on this planet. You need the right mindset and the right skill set to be successful. And honestly, being a woman who's almost 52 years old, I still don't feel that I've mastered this skill. So there's a lot, there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to practice. Well, first of all, let's start with the skill set and the mindset that we need to have great conversations like that. What's your perspective? What do we need to enter into such a conversation well and to handle it as it's going on well, maybe even to prepare for it?
So I recently had a conversation on my podcast with a man called Hammonds. And he's a doctor in intrapersonal and organizational communication. And I think what that conversation left me with was how much we break out other pieces of communication. So we practice our keynote speaking and our storytelling and our presentation making. And we almost never practice sitting face to face to have a conversation that brings us something and think of that as a skill that we need to hone in on in some way. I think that what I was left with in that conversation is he talks about having an understanding of how we encode and decode information. So basically, coming back to this piece of self-awareness, like, how do I understand the world?
Mm-hmm.
So that's, for me, one of the first things. And I think that's true for anything, whether we're talking about relationships or something else, is always starting with, where are you at in this?
Right. So help me understand this, Shani, a little bit. So what you're saying is the first skill to have these conversations well is we need to understand our own filters.
Yeah.
And our own perceptions about the world. And are you also saying that we need to challenge them and kind of validate whether they are accurate?
I don't know if we need to challenge them as much as we need to just understand how they are there.
Okay. Can you give me an example of a filter or an assumption?
Yeah. So Josh, he talks about different communication archetypes. And of course, we can be a constellation of different ones. And paraphrasing here, so and he explains it a lot better, but he talks of, for example, so there might be a relator. The relator is really good at picking up like the emotional undertones of everything. And naturally, they will always pick that up and they will always find it. But they might be really bad at something else.
Maybe analytical kind of processing or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Or maybe if I just go to myself, for example, so I fit into an archetype who is quite high at relating and quite high at like strategic, holistic thinking. I tend to see the big picture, ask a lot of questions. But when it comes down to details, I am no good at all. And I don't hear them. I don't catch them. They're not relevant to me. And that's okay. I think what I came over from that conversation is it's okay that we're not all the archetypes. We all have our different ways of communicating.
Mm-hmm.
So in that context, when you can understand yourself and you can look around in your team and you can see, what is Aga like when she listens and communicates? And maybe rather than going, you know, we've all been there. Oh, why is this person asking another question? Why is this person focusing on this thing? It's more about, oh, cool. Like he or she is doing this thing that I'm really not good at. My conclusion with that conversation was a lot that while, of course, we can, you know, when we're listening, be more mindful. Okay, I'm already good at this. So maybe I pay a little bit more attention to the details when I'm listening to somebody, or I don't have to try to be it all, but I can either play with my awareness or I can use it to figure out what a good composition of people around me can look like. So rather than being then annoyed with the one who isn't like me, I can go, oh, cool, this is a fantastic compliment because this is something I'm not good at all.
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit more of a complementary thinking, I think, than rather always chasing your, what would be your less strong side.
Got you. So it's about communication styles and understanding what's yours and understanding what other people might have as a communication style. So do you have any specific tools to recommend that people use to identify their communication style? I'm thinking of DISC, for example, as one that is very, very popular. And I've used it actually quite a lot at my work many, many years ago when we did leadership development programs. And people love it because it's very intuitive. Like you have 4 colors. It's very easy to kind of wrap your mind around what each of them means. And I think there's great value and also great danger in creating these simple models, of course, and archetypes of communication, because, of course, you know, people have so many dimensions to them. They are not one-dimensional or two-dimensional. So as long as we remember that it's just a construct, right? And every single person is different because they are an alive organism that evolves, I see how important that can be. Number one, you're saying skill number one, know your communication style, identify the communication styles of others, and learn to enter that complementary kind of almost dance in the conversation. I love that. What else do we need to be successful in these conversations?
In my head, I kept, dividing it also into how we transmit communication and how we listen. And I think communication is on both ends, as of course, knowing how we express ourselves and being mindful of that, but also paying attention when we are actually receiving information, what happens to us and how can we in different ways. I think listening is an equally important skill in communication. And there are lots of different ways to be practicing that, of course.
Yeah.
With different types of tricks, whether it's active listening, different techniques in terms of mirroring, such as what you do. It's like, am I understanding this? Paraphrasing each other. It's both those pieces, not necessarily in transmission and not always necessarily about making it a formal thing, but rather moving with awareness. And it might just be, if I know I'm not good at the details, I just put a question out there. I share this story also with Josh is before I went out to start Wonder, which is the company that I run, I was heading up a team of a few people remotely. And I know I'm not good at detail maintenance. I know this. I get a little bit bored. I can't stick with it. I have a very creative mind that's a little bit all over the place. I had a really nice conversation with one of the women on my team, and she was very kindly offering me her perspective on, you did this piece really great, but I felt like I was lacking a little bit of consistency in terms of you maintaining certain things. And I said, yeah, I totally hear that. I know I'm really bad at this. And I still remember her saying, there's this person in the team and she's really great at it. And you don't need to do it all.
Maybe she loves it too.
Exactly. She loves it. There's also that having those conversations. And I think that goes back to this working relationship conversation and the manager-employee type of balance is we're not supposed to be good at everything. That's impossible.
So true.
It's more of how can we fit all the pieces of the puzzle. And when I can say, this is not my strong suit without any shame to that, then solutions will present themselves for sure.
100%. I love that. I think when it comes to mindsets and attitudes that we need to have truly good relationships, one thing that I'm learning and relearning over and over again is we really need to give up our need to be right and exchange it with curiosity in these conversations. And let's be honest, okay? No one is free of the need to be right. So if you're being honest with yourself, and this is to your point, Shani, about self-awareness, if you have a shred of self-awareness, you will know sometimes we just want to be right.
Yeah.
And that's okay. I mean, it's a part of being human. But especially when it comes to those high stakes conversations, like the ones that we talked about, the friction conversation, particularly, I think, giving up the need to be right in return for our need to understand, that's super important. I honestly can't think of anything that is more important than that, just coming from a place of curiosity and also from a place of respect to the other person. And I want to unpack it a little bit to explain what I mean by that, because it's such a cliche, right? People talk about respect and we're like, of course, you have to respect the other person, obviously. But what I mean by respect is, and again, if I asked you, Shani, do you think you are respectful towards other people? Or if you ask me, of course, the reaction would be sure. But let me ask a question differently. Do you ever think to yourself, oh, this person is such a control freak.
Yeah.
Or, right? Or something of this nature. Because I do think things like that about people sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes, And here's the problem. The moment we say this thing to ourselves, I think we've just closed all the doors to having a really powerful conversation with them. Because if we truly believe that this person is a control freak and that's why they behave this way, we are closing the path to curiosity. There is a degree of contempt in it. And I think that stands in the way of having a really good conversation. Unless we can set that aside, that control freak or whatever, and just say, right, that's what I think, but let me get curious here. I don't think that it makes any sense at all, for example, to enter a friction conversation, because it will be just, pulling and pushing and going back and forth about who's right or whose approach is better. And it never ends up, in a good place in my experience.
No, I love what you're adding there. And I think we talk about it a lot in terms of leaving your ego at the door.
Mm-hmm.
So also beyond being right, and we're attached to the ideas that we come up with, to, whatever solutions we had in mind of things working my way or according to my plan. It's a hard process. And I think in those moments, if you just go, give up the need to be right, or give up the need for this, like, what do you do instead? It's like pulling a carpet. You go, okay, cool. Now I'm giving up this need, but what am I doing instead? What I usually offer there is like, fall in love with the impact, fall in love with, the relationship or what it is that you want to achieve together. Find something else to center that isn't you or your idea or something else. So it's not just the letting go of that, is a pivot into centering, the creation, the work, the outcomes that you want to see, whatever it is that you're wanting to generate with that relationship, with that work. That's what you're centering, not your desire, but rather how we make it work.
This is so good. Because you're really giving yourself a different reason, right? A better reason to be in conversation, not to be right, but exactly those things that are way more important in the large scheme of things. When I have friction conversations with my husband, that's one of the situations where I often find myself wanting to be right. But when and if I'm able to kind of zoom out and think about why am I even talking with him, and what are we trying to achieve here as a couple, I always realize, we are actually on the same team, and this person is really important for me. And it's really completely unimportant if I'm right. It's more important to, for example, nurture this relationship or make this person feel calmer or whatever it is. But that why behind the conversation, I think it's so important. Thanks for bringing it up, because it's easy to get lost in other things. I love that as a practice. So just to summarize, I think it's going to be useful for our listeners. So we talked about skills and mindsets, and we talked about the importance of self-awareness and knowing what our communication style is, and, where we're strong, where we are not that strong, and others might help us with those pieces. We talked about the importance of respecting others and giving up our need to be right and having a better reason to have a great conversation. What am I forgetting? What else did we mention?
Ooh, we covered a lot of ground here.
We talked about listening, obviously. You mentioned that, how important that can be. Yeah.
I think actually that's one of the things, is also in that space of giving up your need to be right, is also step out and just, a little bit further than you're comfortable with. Stick with the questions and stick with the listening and stick with the exploration instead of throwing your opinion and desire in there. I think that's also a really good thing to practice. I find myself doing that a lot in different places. When I think I have the answers, I'm like, I'm going to peel back some of what I think, and I'm just going to put the question out there for somebody else.
Yeah.
And usually what is created in that space is so much more powerful than anything I could have ever come up with in my own head.
And don't you find that it's a perfect sign of whether you're doing it right or not, is you really get surprised if you are doing it right. And I think that's the whole point, right? Because as you say, if you set aside your assumptions and you stick to your questions and listening longer than it's comfortable, what I find at least is that these are the moments when I learn something that I didn't expect to hear.
Yeah,
and it's this
entirely.
moment of surprise. And that to me is the feedback that I'm doing it right because I'm learning something new here. Okay, that's cool. I'm mindful of time. I know that we need to be wrapping it up. I want us to explore one final question here because I think it's going to be quite relatable to everyone who's thinking of nurturing relationships, having good conversations. And that's that piece that we all experience around high pressure situations, whether it's we have really ambitious goals or tight deadlines or whatever it is, but we feel high levels of stress. It seems like the stakes are high and things are difficult. I think these are the moments when we feel like we don't have the bandwidth to have the conversations. And at the same time, these are the situations where we probably need those conversations most. And so a little bit of a conundrum, right? Because I experience moments like this as well, when things are moving so fast and there's so much pressure that it seems like we don't have time to talk, you know? What are your thoughts on that?
I love that you're bringing this up. Same as you. I've seen it a lot of times. I've participated in that dynamic a lot of times. Even with ourselves, I think we do it. We don't even check in with ourselves. What I want to say is I think that the maybe counterintuitive thing is usually when we feel the need to put more pressure, that's when we should slow down.
Yeah.
I have this analogy that I've been using since I was in my teens. I used to work extra in this delicatessen shop type place. And I had a really fantastic manager there. Just a lot of laughs, a lot of humor, fantastic leadership and teaching. And she always used to say, and this is going to sound really banal, she always used to say, you know, when you try to put your pants on really fast and you always get stuck and you fall over and you're just trying to go fast, but actually you're just going much slower.
Totally. Navy SEALs have the saying, slow is smooth and smooth is fast.
Yeah, and I think there's an Italian saying as well that I would love to be able to say, but I think the one who goes slow goes long, like goes far.
Yeah.
There is that type of wisdom. Sometimes I remind myself with that pan scenario, I'm like, is this a pan scenario where I'm just trying to like hurry up and actually it's not going to serve me at all. It's going to be a place where I get myself stuck because I didn't take the time to be slow, to be grounded. So yeah, I often actually think that we know this. We have the answer to it and we think we should be deprioritizing it. But I find that slowing down in those moments and spending time on the relationship, spending time on the working relationship, understanding what is needed, what the expectations are, how we can support each other is much more valuable than the pushing through without any type of alignment, without any type of self-alignment or self-awareness. And this is something I struggle with and have to, teach myself to practice all the time. So I'm definitely saying it from a big place of humility, but I do think that, high pressure actually that's when you need to peel off things, not add on.
Super counterintuitive, but this hit me really hard, Shani. So moving on to our key takeaways, I think for me, that's one of them today, because I'm actually going through a high pressure period in my life now, as you know. And there is this pressure that is being created, not just by me or the people close to me, but by the entire system somehow, that you need to move fast. And it's easy to assume that people around us are right, that we need to move fast, take quick decisions. But what you said here is so incredibly important because we really need to start asking ourselves the questions, but why are we doing this? And what are the outcomes that we want to see? And what outcomes are important to us because they will have an impact on the decisions that we make. And so slowing down and having these conversations, I think, with ourselves and also with the people who are involved, it can be so hard to see the importance of that when there is a high pressure situation. So what I'm learning from you, Shani, is when I feel like the pressure is on and, I see just red lights blinking in front of me and I'm so stressed. This is my message to just switch everything off and sit down and just ask myself a few questions or maybe talk to folks about a few things, because it's this vulnerable moment where things can really go off the rails if you don't do that. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah. And I also think, as you were sharing this, that I think often we stick to action and keeping active. And I'm definitely, guilty of this. We think it gives us more control and we think it actually approaches us to the outcomes that we want, but it approaches us more to fatigue and more to thoughtless actions. This is a takeaway I was reminded of as you put it up there. I really liked how we wrapped up the friction conversation. I always love a good moment of like co-creation and reasoning together. We underestimate the power that those, and I think we've covered that in a lot of our episodes, how much when we know how to harness friction and know how to go into it in constructive ways, there is so much power and so much evolution and so much that's possible from those moments. I think that was one that stuck with me also on this very person-to-person level.
Yeah, that's super cool. And speaking of the friction conversation, there's just one thing that I want to say for our listeners if they want to check it out. There are protocols that teams and companies create to have difficult conversations. And I think that it sounds super formal. And frankly, when I hear the word protocol, I have a bad reaction immediately. I think I'm a little bit of a rebel. And when people tell me, this is how we're going to do things now, I don't necessarily react very well to it. But I see the value of that, especially in the organizational setting, because if you have a playbook that can help, so in a team environment, particularly, it's part of this working relationship conversation, actually, probably, where you talk, hey, when we sense friction in our relationship, what are we going to do in that situation? And sort of almost contracting with each other, right? This is what we're going to do. We're going to set some time and say what we're noticing and then ask each other questions, blah, blah, blah. I think creating protocols like that and maybe giving them a better name so that people don't have an allergic reaction. Yeah. I think it can be a super useful tool to handle these situations.
Just to add to that is, in the last few months, I've been diving back into reading on self-led organizations. And I think something that stands out for me is a lot of them identify, and it's not always the same types of moments, but they identify moments of potential friction and they have a way of working around it, which doesn't center the individuals. It helps all the people center the work and it gives everyone a role to play within that dynamic. So, whatever you are or whatever you're thinking, that's not relevant. Here's how we play this game. And I think that's really useful. And it's back to that point of centering something else than yourself. I have to say, though, a question that hit me also really hard in our conversation was your question when you started talking about working relationship was, what do I look like when I'm at my best? I think we're so much when we work with growth and evolution, we talk about where we need to be improving. And this is such a powerful question also to be reflecting on. And I know you do that a lot. You ask those types of questions. And this time in particular, it really hit me. I thought, I'm taking this with me for sure. Just more of that.
You will love the conversation with Michael Bangistania if that resonated. And he has a whole book that is called Working with Almost Anyone, or Working Well with Almost Anyone. I'm butchering it now. And it's really great. There are 5 questions to ask. And one of them is, what does it look like for you when you're at your best? I think it's really for anyone who wants to build a good working relationship. This book is one of the books that should be on your shelf, and check out our interview with him as well.
Amazing.
Shani, thank you for doing this again. It's always such a joy to be in conversation with you, and you know how much I appreciate it. It's something that I genuinely look forward to every month. Like, yay, I'm going to have a deep dive with Shani. So thank you for being so great to chat with. And to you, our listeners, if you want to talk with us about this topic, I think both Shani and I spend a little bit of time every day on LinkedIn. This is probably the best way to reach out to us. And we'd love to hear what are your thoughts and reflections, or maybe practices when it comes to having successful conversations, the conversations that matter, or simply let us know what you thought of this episode. Thank you for listening. I'm Aga Bajer, the creator and host of the CultureLab podcast. And this is the CultureLab team.
Anis Enlabarawi, production manager.
Sound producer, Heather McPherson, Twisted Spur Media.
I hope that you enjoyed this new monthly format where Shani and I discuss all things culture. If you found this conversation interesting or inspiring or valuable, and chances are that you did since you are still listening here, you'll also love the conversation that I recently had with Michael Bangistania. You'll find a link in the show notes. And if you haven't already done so, please go ahead and follow the CultureLab podcast in your favorite listening app. And please do me a personal favor, a few seconds favor, and share it maybe on social or by text or by email. Even if it's just with one person, just copy the link from the app that you are using and tell your friends who want to find new, better ways of cultivating a great company culture. Tell them to listen, and then maybe you can chat about it. Maybe you can chat about what you've both discovered, because when shows like this become conversations and conversations become action, that's how we transform the workplace culture together. And if you want to dive even deeper into the topics and find like-minded peers who are in charge of culture work in the organization, you might consider joining CultureBrained. It's a one-of-a-kind culture accelerator program and a global community of peers that is truly shaping the future of work. You can learn more at tinyurl.com/CultureBrained. You'll find the link in the show notes. Thanks again for tuning in. If you want to get free resources on cultivating a remarkable, powerful, and authentic company culture, especially in a business that scales, type this into your browser: agabayer.com/resources. If you haven't subscribed to the CultureLab yet, please do it now. That's the best way you can support our work. And finally, we would be ever so grateful if you could rate and review our podcast on the platform that you listen to. Thank you, and you are amazing for listening to this point. Not many people do.